Welcome back to the Four Gardens podcast. I'm Jake Ifshin. In this episode, we'll continue focusing on health, which is the first garden in the Four Gardens approach to cultivating balance and joy in life. Today, I'm joined by Becca Salky, who will be sharing her story of living with MOG antibody disease. Becca is my stepsister, and in the 20 years I've known her, periodically she would experience intense debilitating symptoms from the disease, including seizures and blindness. Now Becca is a trained nurse, currently working as a researcher into MOG antibody disease and an advocate for people living with MOG. I was moved by the way Becca found personal growth in some of the hardest moments of her illness. How when she lost her vision, she found gratitude in what was left and in being alive and being able to still see. But she lost vision in one eye. I was moved by how she tells her story of how steroids changed her appearance, caused her to gain weight, and affected her skin as a teenager, and how that grew empathy for her. And I was also moved by the mission she has of spreading awareness around MOG and the research she did and the advocacy for herself and into getting her diagnosis and learning about her illness and how it helped transform her into the healer and the advocate she is today. As always, I'm joined by my co-producer and co-host, Ariel Rubens, to talk about the episode. And Ari, how did this episode impact you in my conversation with Becca?
Oh, it did impact me because autoimmunity is something I've dealt with for many years. And to hear her message, her story, and how challenging it was, but despite the challenge, she's now sharing the message of healing. She is choosing gratitude. She's choosing to be grateful for, and that just lights me up and gives me hope for myself and for the world. You know, no matter what you're going through, you can be grateful for and you can help others.
We talk a lot about heroes' journeys on this podcast, and this certainly feels like a great one to me of triumphant. I really felt how hard it was for Becca in this journey, and also how she really took so many positives out of this. I really felt like I learned a lot and take away a lot of inspiration to appreciate my health, to help others, and to be persistent in advocating for myself and my own health. With that, let's jump right in. Why is spreading awareness of MOG important to you?
Spreading awareness is important to me because so few people know what MOG is. I have had MOG since I was 4 years old. It's affected me in so many ways, but not a lot of people can understand how exactly it's affected me because they don't even know, what this disease is. So I would just like to spread awareness to general population about what MOG is. I'd also like to spread awareness within the MOG community about some of the nuances of MOG that people newly diagnosed might not know about. I have had MOG since I was 4 years old, so I've had a long history, a long journey with it, learning a lot of the different ways it can present, and that can really vary depending on the person, depending on the situation, depending on the relapse. So really, I just want to spread awareness and show people what MOG is.
And from hearing your story too, I know that having known more about MOG earlier would have made a big impact for you in your life. It's something we'll hear about from you as you tell about your journey with MOG, but that getting your diagnosis and the process of gaining knowledge was a kind of essential feature of learning about this condition as you went through it.
So MOG wasn't diagnosable until 2017. So I have had this disease since 1997. they could not put a label on it. They could not name it. They just knew I had episodes where I would periodically lose my vision. I had an episode where I was paralyzed from the waist down. I couldn't walk for a week, maybe 10 days, and had a seizure. I've had all sorts of different types of episodes. And that's another reason I wanted to do this episode and participate in this, is because I have had different presentations of the disease, which is another kind of classic feature that a lot of people don't understand.
Let's start from the beginning with the story. You started to mention some of the experiences you had, and MOG starting very early for you. What was the beginning of this first chapter of MOG in your life like?
Yes, so the first chapter was started in 1997 in December. It's right before my 5th birthday. I was sick for a little bit. I wasn't really feeling well. It was just a sinus infection was presumed, which was common for me as a kid. I got sick a decent amount. So no one really thought much of it and was put on antibiotics. But about 5 days later, I woke up and I was not able to move anything below my waist. So I think I've tried, again, I was young. I don't remember all the details, but tried to walk to tell my parents and wasn't able to. So I ended up crawling using my arms to get to my parents' room and tell them what was going on, which was just that I wasn't able to walk. So we rushed to the emergency room. I got an MRI and a spinal tap, and the doctor said this looks like MS. It was very like MS, like multiple sclerosis. And the only thing was that I was really young. Typically an MS diagnosis comes in your 20s. So I was 4 years old. It didn't really make any sense how I was presenting with this. So it was still a question mark as to what was going on. Thankfully, there was a very smart doctor at Georgetown Hospital who decided to start me on steroids. So I started high-dose steroids, and within a week or so, I was able to move my legs again. I was able to function. Everything, I think, basically recovered within a couple of weeks, and at which point I started to taper off of the medication. Then maybe a month later, again, I was 5 years old at this point in time, so I wasn't the best at explaining to my mom what I was going through, but through stories I've learned that a few weeks later, I tripped or something had happened where my mom or my dad had questioned, are you not able to see right now? Is something wrong with your vision? And at that point in time, I said, yeah, everything's blurry. I can't see anything. So they rushed me to the emergency room. They did some tests and they diagnosed me with optic neuritis, which is inflammation of the optic nerves. The episode a month earlier had been diagnosed as acute disseminated encephalomyelitis, which is a long word for inflammation of the brain and spine. So they knew I had these features. I had inflammation of the brain, I had inflammation of the spine, and I had inflammation of the optic nerves. Those are all pretty classic MS features, as well as a condition called neuromyelitis optica. So both of those things had been thrown out. I don't know if NMO had been brought up at that time, but it was a question mark. What I actually had and what was driving these symptoms and the inflammation to occur was still just a question mark. Thankfully.
Well, go ahead. Thankfully,
steroids is the treatment. So they started me on steroids for all of these things, and I quickly regained vision, quickly regained the ability to walk. Everything seemed to settle when I would get those treatments. So at least they knew which acute treatment to give me.
what was the experience like of going through this? What are your memories of being 5 and going through these regimens and experiences?
In terms of what I remember about the first episode, it's not much. I I think that is sort of maybe a trauma response, and that I don't remember any of it. I don't remember any of the bad parts of it. I have some good memories of the hospital. I have some good memories of eating lots of ice cream. When I would get to stay in the hospital, it would be terrible, 2-week stays sometimes. But what I remember is getting ice cream from the shop. Also at like any meal, I would say I want ice cream and I would get it. And I remember being pushed around in the wheelchair because, especially that first episode when I couldn't walk, I was in a wheelchair, and my parents there was a little ramp in the hospital, very, very small decline. But I think my mom and dad would go behind me, and they would let go of the wheelchair, and it'd feel like a roller coaster to me. And I was like, roller coaster time, roller coaster time. And they would stand behind it. Obviously, they weren't far away, and catch it before it hit the bottom. But for me, I remember the slide, that roller coaster slide, and the ice cream very well. So I'm glad I have those good memories of the first attacks, and I don't remember these needles and the poking. One thing I do remember is getting IVs as a child. I would scream my head off, and they used a numbing cream called, I think, Emla cream was what they used to use. I don't even think that exists anymore, because it didn't do anything. But they would pretend that it would numb it up, and then they'd stick you. And I have some scars from the battle wounds of them trying to get IVs in me when I was a child.
Ooh, yeah, it's those are two pretty contrasting experiences of ice cream and IVs. They're pretty different. And just also tracking, as I'm hearing this too, how some of your positive connection to medicine started in those early years. It sounds like, of your relationship to the hospital and medicine. That seed was planted in those early visits. Sounding like to me.
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely. And I had so many great nurse role models over the years that most likely influenced my decisions.
So you're saying that steroid regimen really was working for you at that time.
Yes.
What came next after the steroids working and these first episodes?
So after that, it was pretty distinct pattern of once a year where my vision would shut down, one eye or the other. That first time it shut down, it was both eyes at the same time. And actually, in that first attack, the right was worse than the left. And the doctor had said, the neuro-ophthalmologist had said, there's no way she's going to see out of her right eye again. They told my parents that. They said, it's just so gone. There's like barely any myelin left on the covering. That's the nerve covering that protects the nerve. And they were doubtful that I would be able to see again. Thankfully, the steroids helped me a ton, and within a couple months, my vision was back to normal. Once a year after that, so from the ages of 5 to 10, once a year, I would lose the vision in one eye or the other. We would do the same thing. Steroids, I'd recover within anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months, and I'd be okay for the rest of the year, and then it would happen again. One interesting thing was that it happened many times in April. So there was always this suspicion. My mom did her detective work and really was sure that April meant something, and there was seasonal allergies, or there's something going on in DC where we lived, like that was triggering this. And I think that's what really got my mom started in record keeping. And so she created a binder, or the whole outline of my condition, every relapse, every possible trigger that happened before it. Was I sick? Was it April? Were there allergies? Was anything going on? What happened during the relapse, and then what the treatment was. And I have this great outline now, which I carry around with me every time I move. I've moved apartments like every 2 years for the last 8 years. So many places, and it's my little thing I carry around with me everywhere I go.
I remember those conversations around April and around your vision. It's been kind of a constant feature. Well, the vision, since I've known you, vision has been a long journey for you with vision coming in and out and treatments. And I just remember that from early on, that this was always like a group detective. Your mom and your dad are part of this.
Yes.
And there's like a group detective kind of medical detectives that quality that's happening. And so I didn't know that about the binder. That's pretty interesting that you can continue that.
Yeah, it's great. One thing that was also interesting about my case is that from 10 years old to 15 years old, I was healthy, perfectly healthy. It was sort of like, maybe that was a childhood illness. No one really knew what it was at the time. So, maybe it's just gone. Maybe it was a pediatric thing that we'll never know what it was. But then I was 15 years old, and I do remember this. I was sitting on my bed with my best friend, Tani, and all of a sudden I started to see two of her. And it was out of the blue. I just was seeing double, and I looked around the room. Everything was double. So told my mom. She knew the deal, the regimen. I was at her house at the time. She called the hospital, and I got rushed in. We did the normal deal that I did as a kid, which was steroids and a taper. Which steroids are something that you could do a whole episode on just steroids. They're an amazing miracle drug, but they have a lot of side effects. Side effects that I, as a 15-year-old, was really not ready to deal with. And I think for me, one of the worst, it sounds so, like shallow, but one of the hardest things to deal with was the intense, quick weight gain that comes with steroids. And as a 15-year-old in high school, it's kind of prime time to be going through this type of stuff. I gained 30 pounds in a month, and I was out of school for that month. So when I went back to school, I just remember walking in, and so the first comment, someone grabbing my cheeks and going, "Oh my goodness, you're so chubby." And that stuff like stuck with me. I did a theater program that summer, and someone looked at my pictures on Facebook and said, "Oh my God, Becca, you did used to be pretty." And little comments like that would come up, and you're 15, 16 going through this. That was really just like eye-opening for me. Honestly made me, I think I take positives from that. It made me a better person going through that and seeing that, like what privilege I had before that. And it really, I just saw that people are treated differently based on how they look. And that wasn't something that ever entered my mind before having had that experience. So I feel like that made me grow a lot as a person, even that sounds minor there, but in a lot of ways that experience just helped me open my eyes. That was a tangent about steroids, but the whole point of that was that because of all the weight gain and because all the acne and just effects it was having also on my mood, and it just impacts every part of your life, I wanted to get off the steroids as quickly as I could. And steroids are not really a science. They just don't know how quick the taper schedule could be. Some people, it depends on the doctor, it depends on the clinic, it depends on the country, state, etc. Some of my friends in the UK, it's normal for them to be on steroids at minimum 3 months, whereas for us in the US, that's like the maximum they'll want to keep you on it. So at that point in time, I said, I don't want to be on steroids anymore. I'm 15, I'm gaining all this weight, let's just take me off quickly. And I don't think the doctors are thrilled about that decision, but they also couldn't say like, absolutely not, this will happen, because we just didn't know. So I did go off steroids pretty rapidly. And during that time, I don't know if this actually was the cause, but I believe it was. During that time of going off steroids really quickly, I had a seizure. And I had a really big seizure in the middle of math class. in 11th grade. I remember that very, very well. And after that seizure, things just started to sort of change in my disease. Before that, it was episodes of vision loss that would quickly recover and go away, and I'd be healthy for the rest of the year, and it happened again the next year. So it went from that to turning into multiple episodes a year of vision loss, only in the right eye after the seizure. Don't know what happened there. Recalibrated something, maybe, knock on wood. And eventually, having had 3 or 4 episodes a year just in the right eye, my vision eventually went away. So now I'm blind in the right eye. I have been since I was 20, 21. It was kind of bad vision. I actually popped a champagne cork into my right eye on my 21st birthday. So thankfully, thank whatever is out there that it hit my right eye, which was already blind, and not the left. And little things like that you got to be grateful for along the way.
I'm hearing how there's just each part of your life, there are these intense phases with MOG, like this 15 to 16-year-old phase was important to you. And very much, like I heard how the childhood phase of this was ice cream and IVs, and very much I felt your 5-year-old Becca, and then 15-year-old Becca, I was really felt for you with the weight gain, the acne. I mean, I remember being 15. It's an insecure time for me. It was. And yeah, I think humans were just extra sensitive then to all of that stuff, especially in our society. And just to have to go through that, like, it makes sense why you'd want to come off the steroids at that time. And then also this like last phase too, of hearing that there was this college phase too of the vision loss, the champagne cork. I remember each of these phases too from afar, hearing about them from you and others. And that was the latest phase. And what was the aftermath of the losing the eye? Like, any lessons there of that experience in that period?
Yeah, and I think I'm continuing to learn from that. It's been over 5 years, but I'm still adjusting to it. And I mean, I'm learning you got to be grateful for what you have. I'm very, very grateful that I have the vision I do have. My left eye isn't perfect. I have about 40 degrees in every direction of crisp, clear vision, and the rest is faded and dark. But I do, when I have moments of being very upset about what's happened, it just doesn't help me. It's not beneficial to me. It doesn't make me feel good. And the stress of it, I feel like, makes my symptoms worse. So for me, it does help to be grateful and to remember, say, I'm so glad I can see what's in front of me right now. Like I can still see, I can still walk. I've had one seizure, but there are still things that I can do, and it's not a death sentence. Even if I wasn't able to see, even if I do lose my eye, like there's so many things that you can be grateful for. And for me, that's what gets me through.
Really inspired hearing that. It's beautiful. And I'm going to take that with me today. Sure. That message too, of being grateful for what I have and for being alive, is what I'm hearing too, of just how you grateful for what you have in each day. Changes the way you view. I'm hearing how that changes the way you view that loss of the one eye. Yeah. I want to ask about too, you were earlier in the story, you were talking about the detective work and the medical history stuff you were doing. Bring us up to this point in the story of what was going on with diagnosis and doctors getting up to this point of the vision loss.
Yeah. So around when I was a kid, they weren't so focused on let's find the cause of this. So there were diagnoses thrown around, but nothing that was truly investigated. When I was 15, though, after that seizure, that's when my mom and dad got really invested in finding the best doctors and figuring out how to get me the diagnosis. So I developed care with a great doctor at Children's Hospital. And so Dr. Vanderver and Dr. Avery was my neuro-ophthalmologist. They were awesome. And although the diagnosis wasn't correct, they did a lot to keep the vision that they could, and to keep me on the treatments that they thought were the right treatments. So that was the start of me getting interested in research, was them sort of opening the door to allowing me to question the diagnoses I was being given. I also quickly want to say that I also, because this will come into the story, I went to Mayo Clinic because my parents found this great doctor at Mayo Clinic that specialized in what I had been diagnosed with, NMO. And they took my blood at that visit. That'll come into the story at some point, but they had stored my blood there from 2010. So my parents were getting me into Mayo Clinic, Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania, trying to research kind of like the best doctors for what they presumed I had at the time. I wasn't really on board, we could say, during this whole time. I was sure I did not have NMO. I was adamant that I didn't have it. And this was based on my internet searches of both just Google, but also in the school's library system, looking at the research, PubMed, things like that, to see what is neuromyelitis optica and do I actually have it. I was convinced I didn't have it because of the number of attacks I had. One of the major differences at the time, and I think I still believe that this is true, is that NMO is characterized by just a couple episodes and then having a disability like I have now, like loss of vision, whereas I had over 20, 30 episodes before that had happened. So, and I was still had perfect vision. Everything I'd recovered when I was 15. I was sure I didn't have NMO. I said, how could I have NMO when I am at this level, and what I'm reading about says that wouldn't be possible. As a child, my attacks were just treated with the steroids and everything would be okay, and they would recur the next year and the same treatment would be given. After the seizure, when I started to get more relapses more often, they realized they had to start me on some medications. So they put me on immune suppressives when I was 15 years old, which for me were a little bit better than the steroids. You know, my first question, I think, was, does it have the same side effects as steroids? Because if not, sure. If it does, no. They said no. I was started on a medication that didn't work. It's now not one of the first line treatments for the disease. They know now. They use it in NMO, which is what I was diagnosed with, but way less often in MOG. But so I was put on that med. It didn't work. I continued to relapse multiple times a year. They switched me to another medication, which also didn't work. And that medication caused a lot of other problems. So I actually have a colitis now because of that medication, and I don't have any B cells. Just some not fun side effects that have actually stayed with me, unfortunately. But now that's not a common treatment for MOG, so that's good at least. Things have been learned in the less than 10 years since I've been on that drug. So that's exciting for us. The reason that I bring that up, though, is because being on those medications made it a lot harder to get the diagnosis. So even though I was saying, I have MOG, and Mayo Clinic had these tests out starting in 2015, just for research purposes, not commercially available yet. But they had this test, and I said, please test me for MOG. I've been saying for years, I have this disease. There's now a test out. Let's just do it. And I was so certain that would come back positive. It's like, I have this disease. It's positive. But it came back negative. So at that moment, I didn't know what to do. I was so sure finally. I knew what I had, and I was petitioning to the doctors. I have this. And then it came back negative. I don't think I completely lost faith, though, that I had MOG, that I was right about that. Something that also comes up a lot, me thinking I'm right about my medical stuff. But I was really convinced that I had MOG. And it wasn't until I got to NYU and met a doctor there, Dr. Kister, who really took actions and decided, yes, you actually might be right. Like, and he said, didn't you go to Mayo Clinic in 2010 before you got diagnosed, before you were on anything? Didn't you go to Mayo Clinic? I was like, yeah, I did. I absolutely did. And he said, you probably had blood stored there. You had this rare unknown condition. I'm sure Mayo Clinic stored your blood for research purposes. So they called Mayo. And the next day, I actually checked this recently because it was really impressive, the turnaround time. They called me the next day and said, Becca, great news for me. It was great news. Some news for you. You tested positive for MOG, antibody disease. And I was like, it was an amazing moment for me. Had been saying, so this was November 8th of 2016. I got my diagnosis, and it was something I've been waiting for over 20 years. So
What's that? Say a little more about that feeling of getting it too, because that's a remarkable story, the Mayo Clinic thing too. I didn't know the details of that. But what's the feeling of hearing this?
I mean, of course, for me, I was just like, I was right. That's where my brain first goes. So I was relieved. And that's also bad to say. It wasn't that I really didn't want the other things. It was that I was so sure. I'd been like saying this for so many years. I have MOG. And sort of just along the lines of what I'd experienced in meeting with many doctors throughout my life, no one took me seriously. And no one took my symptoms seriously. Or they'd say it was stress, which is another thing that is important to talk about. A lot of young women are just told it's stress. So just that feeling of not being taken seriously, and then getting that diagnosis of being like, one, I was right. And also I don't know. Some people, when I tell them that I got the diagnosis, like they think it's going to be a sad story. But for me, I was just really, really relieved, really happy to finally have a name for it. I had lived in so much uncertainty. I had gone to a therapist in college and focused on learning to cope with uncertainty for 2 years. And she was so helpful. Lessons I've taken with me throughout, since that time, that this disease, autoimmune diseases in general, are uncertain. We can't control everything. But then I got that little bit of certainty, and it was really validating.
Validating, yeah. And I was hearing how you were dismissed earlier and how you fought for it. I thought you were kind of a badass there when you were saying that. You are a badass for sure, not kind of standing up to these doctors, being a young person. Just when I say standing up, of just feeling powerful in your own research and your own experience, and just speaking up for yourself and advocating for yourself, and finding allies in the medical community too that believed you too, and that would look into what you were feeling and claiming too. And you did it, you drove it, and you also didn't do it alone too. I like that too. You worked together with others.
Definitely did not do it alone. Yeah. That doctor at NYU taking me seriously, as well as my current boss, actually. It's my neurologist. After that, also just took me seriously, believed I knew what I was talking about. My Dr. Levy, who's at Mass General, who I work for now, asked me to work for him because of this knowledge I have about MOG, and both from the experiences of going through it and of researching it and just petitioning, saying this is my case. This is why I have it. Here are the reasons. Here are the sources to back it up.
Yeah, I think what you said about uncertainty too, him helping you find that. You use science to. I like that we can celebrate that you celebrate that little bit of certainty in an uncertain world too. Of that was such a quality of your experience, hearing your story, that you were struck by this mystery disease multiple times, different phases, many times in your life, and to just have that. To me, it sounds like there's just some power too over it. Of I know what's happening. This isn't a full mystery anymore. Like, yes, there's uncertainty in life, but you earned some level of this is what's happening. I can orient myself to healing and to what's happening to my body and to me. And that's really a triumph. That is beautiful.
And it's also interesting to see that how quickly things have changed. I used to be in the hospital and a team of doctors would come into the room every time. A team of doctors saying, look at this rare, we don't know what's going on. I was sort of like that experiment. You'd just be laying in the bed, 10 to 12 doctors in the room, just poking, prodding. They'd bring in different specialties. They'd say, hey, you want to see what's going on? This is a rare, we don't really know condition. And it was to get some power in those situations. My way of doing that was learning about the disease and being able to contribute to the conversation and say, I'm not just a subject for you to poke and prod, but I can help you out here. I can tell you my experience of living with it. And something that Dr. Levy did was actually listen to my true experiences and say, you could be really valuable both to the research and the actual lab, but also to all these patients who are going through this new diagnosis and going through the period of uncertainty and not really knowing how to live with this new diagnosis.
Let's talk a little bit about your career now too. You're not just a subject or a patient. You're a medical professional, a nurse, an advocate.
Yes.
I'd like to hear more about that journey in your work.
So starting senior year of college was when I realized I wanted to go to nursing school. I had a background in psychology, and I'm very grateful for that. I think that's helped me so much in just life. So I'm really glad I got that first bachelor's in psychology. But I realized in my last year at Skidmore College that I really wanted to go to nursing school. And they had a really cool program, a little hybrid program with NYU, where I could kind of just be accepted if my GPA was above a certain level. So I just did the prerequisites and went I took a year off and finished those prerequisites and then went to nursing school. And a huge part of that decision was the nurses that I had experienced with, especially in college. So during college, I would go home, and because my doctors were located in DC, a lot of the times if I had relapses or if I had to be treated, I would go all the way back to DC from Saratoga Springs, New York, just to be treated for that week, sometimes for 2 weeks. And I had such amazing nurses there, just very impactful, both in the career way, but also just like getting me through college times, boyfriend drama, stuff like that. They became my resources there. And I remember one in particular, Shelly Shear, was like my girl. She was my nurse. She encouraged me to pursue nursing. She encouraged me to pursue neuroscience nursing and going into my disease. And she understood that I knew a lot, and I knew a lot about this specific thing. I knew how I wanted to help, what I was going to do to help, things like that. So that definitely got me along the lines of like being a nurse. Once I actually was a nurse, it's a little bit harder for me because of my condition, honestly. I think being a nurse is a really, really, really tough job. Kudos to all the nurses out there. That I didn't realize. I didn't realize even after 15 months of nursing school, I didn't realize how hard the job would be on your body and your brain, the demands. It's just a really difficult job, especially when you have an autoimmune disease to deal with. And I was finding that I wasn't able to see the veins for the IVs as well. And some of the nursing tasks that you have to have really good vision for, I wasn't able to do. So for me, that was stressful. I like being good at things, and I felt like I wasn't really good at that, and I couldn't be good at it. So it was a little bit discouraging, and decided to step back from that a little bit. And so when the pandemic hit, I worked about 2 months into the pandemic. But because of the lack of B cells and because of my other health issues, it didn't really make sense to continue to be a nurse at that point. So I quit my job. I was sort of relaxing at home. And that's when I realized I really wanted to get involved in MOG research in some way, or MOG community in some way. I had never met someone with MOG. I had never, like, there were these Facebook pages that I would sometimes look at, but I'd never posted or interacted with anyone. And it felt like there was a gap that wasn't there yet. There weren't these like support networks. So I decided in May of 2020 to just do a post on Facebook in one of those groups, excuse me, and to ask if anyone would like to be part of a support group. And I was so surprised, but like an overwhelming response to that Facebook post, and lots of, I think over 100 likes and 20 to 30 comments just saying like, yes, please, how do I sign up? How can I do this? And so that's when I started to think seriously, I want to form a support group, and how should I best do this? And how can I get into the MOG world? So that really kicked things off. I decided to hone in on young adults. That was my age group, and it just didn't make sense because having been a child with MOG, I know that a 4-year-old is going through something different than a 15-year-old, going through something different than a 25-year-old. I'm sure later on it's different too. So I just wanted to do I decided to do an 18 to 30, 35-year-old group. And now I have met probably over 35, maybe 40 people with MOG, at least on these Zoom groups. And in person, I've met 5 or 6. And I was still unemployed during that time, though. During 2020, just running these support groups and wasn't doing much. And I wanted to come up to Boston to visit some friends of mine. So my doctor, Dr. Levy, had just changed hospitals. He was at Hopkins before, and he had just moved to Mass General. And I hadn't seen him in over a year. So it was about a year since I'd last seen him. So I called him up and I said, should I be making an appointment with you? I'm going to be in Boston. Like, it's been about a year. And he said, yeah, sure. I want to see, we should do the appointment. I also want to hear about your career, because he knew I was a nurse. He was really interested in my career plans and everything like that. And I told him that I was actually unemployed. I'd started these support groups, but I actually wasn't working right then. And he said, wow, that's great. Would you like to come work for me on MOG clinical trials? So I was like, what is this? I don't know. I thought it was maybe a joke. I was just like, what's happening? Sure, but yes. I was like, absolutely. I didn't know if it was a real legit experience. It was. I went in, I had a little quick interview, and a few months later started work, and here I am. We launched the first clinical trial in MOG, so it's a drug trial, first ever drug trial in MOG antibody disease, and that was launched about 2 months ago, and we've got that going, and we have another coming up. So it's a really exciting time in MOG research, in the MOG world. Trials are only a small part of it. There's also a whole nother avenue of, research I could get into that I won't today.
Well, hearing about this brings me a lot of joy. I mean, both of you finding the community, building the community, you were the organizer of support groups, and then the research starting, being part of the research. It brings me a lot of joy. I feel proud of you for what you're, someone in my family, my stepsister, I'm just proud of what you're accomplishing and how you're responding to this illness. It's really, really inspiring to me to hear that. And I want to hear a little bit about each of those things, actually, before we move on, of just what was a gift of coming together with other people that had MOG, like some gift you got from that. And then also just a little more about how it's changed your perspective of doing this clinical work in your current job.
Having a community and knowing other people with MOG, it's been so impactful for me. It's been really special having like friends. I do consider them friends. I just see them on Zoom once or twice a month, but these like good friends who know what I'm going through. They understand it. They've been through it too. They know what it's like to live in I don't let the fear, control my life, but you always have this fear in the back of your mind that you're going to have a relapse, something bad is going to happen. And you learn to live with that, but it's something that not a lot of people can understand. So having this community, both in just my small support group, but also in the larger support groups, like the MOG Project, who invited me to join their organization, to bring my support group into their organization. And they now run support groups for young adults, for parents of kids with MOG. They have these little different groups that target a specific population, and really growing the network and community of MOG has been so impactful in so many ways. Like, I can even see now more doctors know what it is just through patients educating their doctors, and their doctors tell their friends. There's a ripple effect there, and it's awesome just getting people more involved and being a part of that.
Hey there. I thank you so much for sharing everything you did until now. What insight or advice would you give to anyone experiencing autoimmunity?
So I think there are a lot of different things that can contribute to symptoms, symptom progression, or the worsening of those symptoms that come with autoimmune diseases. They can be really varied. There can be, they can be different, like I said, even within diseases, but definitely in different distinct diseases, there'll be different symptoms. However, what I have found is that a few things that have helped me. I think that diet has actually played a really big role. I think this really varies per person, what would help them, and what I think going to a nutritionist and getting a targeted specific diet that, helped me maintain and lower the inflammation in my body helped me a lot. So for me, that was cutting out sugar, that was cutting out gluten, and things like that. Everyone has different triggering points, and I think that it does require a more individualized thing than just saying cut this out or cut that out. But just paying attention to diet and how it makes your body feel. And I think with everything, I think diet, with stress levels, maintaining stress, and whatever that means to you. If for you guys said you went rock climbing earlier, that's your way to de-stress, then see how that makes your body feel. Does it make your body feel good? Take note of that after. And trying to put your body in scenarios where it's not overly pushed. You're not putting that physiological stress on it, and you have time to get back to, a homeostasis. Because what's happening in autoimmune diseases is the system is inflamed. There's something causing that inflammation. So the goal is to decrease that inflammation somehow. I think there are lots of different factors go into play, lots of little things that you can change and tweak, but it is very individualized, and it's all about being able to listen to your body.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful answer. That applies to a lot of that feels like applies to me, and I can work with that even though I'm not experiencing autoimmune disease. It's really sound health advice. So thanks for offering that to the audience, and thank you for taking the time today for sharing your story, which is so moving and inspiring to me, and for continuing to do the work to help people with MOG and educate the general community and population around what MOG is. Are there any invitations or resources people could look at, ways to get involved, to donate or support your work or other work going on around MOG?
Yeah, definitely. So there are multiple resources to both learn about MOG. It's going to be through the MOG Project, through MGH Neuroimmunology Clinic, through My Myelitis, Sumaira Foundation. And there are lots of places to donate, which would help us along with our research through MGH, as well as all the organizations I just listed.
So we'll include those links in the description box below to give money and support. Thank you so much again for taking the time today to talk. Is there anything else you wanted to share before we close our conversation today?
I don't think so. Thank you so much for having me and letting me share my story today. I hope that it helps people.
Thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Becca Salkey today. As always, we have a health tip from Ari Rubens. Ari, what do you have for us today?
Hey, so I got a health tip that's relevant to anyone. And in this case, it's someone going through autoimmunity or some stress or inflammation. So check this out. If you're ever stressed, try this. Step 1, slow your breath down. Your breath is largely linked to your mind, and your mind is largely linked to your nervous system. So slowing your breath down by 2 to 3 counts. Okay. Next, change your environment. Step outside for a walk or go to another room and maybe at the same time play some nice music. So you want to change the state, ideally to something more peaceful. Walk in the woods. And finally, hug someone. Give someone a hug if you can, or talk to someone on the phone. And by incorporating these 3 tips, hopefully you can step into a state of less stress and more rest.
All right, it sounds like you could combine those together, right? You could give somebody a hug in nature and slow your breath down all at the same time.
Yes.
One clarification I wanted to get is you said slow down by 2 or 3 counts. For someone who's new to breath work or meditation, how do you slow down breath? Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, the really simple way to go about that is to count with your fingers how many counts in and counts out. Say 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Even that alone makes it really simple. When you're more stressed, you're typically breathing up here in more shallow breath. But in order to slow it down, you want to fill up your belly and then your chest with air. And add another 2 counts. Say if you're doing 4-4, go to 4-6 or 4-8 ideally. And simply use the counting of your fingers to make that happen.
It's really remarkable how well that works for me, slowing my breath down. All right, thank you so much for the tip.
You're welcome.
If you like this episode, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment, leave a review. Any interaction you have, sharing the podcast. These are amazing ways to support this work, help it get out there and grow the project. So I would really appreciate that. I know Ari would appreciate that too. We put a lot of love into these episodes. So I'd be grateful if you shared them. Again, thank you for listening and keep on growing.